From the Delhi studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The United States has just banned Russian oil imports. The ruble is tanking. The war in Ukraine has not been as clean, as simple as Putin had hoped for. And now the decision is for Putin to make. Can Putin afford to take this war forward any longer? Or is cornering Putin only going to push him to the extreme? What is that extreme? Here is what our reporters have been seeing on the ground, and then we'll debate that.
What you see behind me is a house that was completely demolished in an aerial bombardment. In fact, a 500-kilogram bomb was dropped by the Russians around 2:30 in the morning. What's really happened is that this entire area, this entire room where children were actually staying, about 5 children were staying when the Russians carried out an aerial bombardment. This entire area has been completely destroyed, damaged.
З часів вторгнення нацистів від зневоднення померла дитинка. Почуйте мене сьогодні, шановні партнери.
We just saw an ambulance leave, and that's because they were carrying a injured man that just came off one of the buses here. We've seen a couple of injuries so far. One child that had to be carried off, and a injured man that had a patch on his eye. We've got a lot more to come, but it seems like this ceasefire is finally starting to make some headway, and some people are leaving Mariupol.
On the one hand, we are looking at how the pressure is also being built on Russia. Many would say that we are talking about the economic sanctions, but how has it really helped the Ukrainians at this stage? Because on the one hand, you've seen the frustration that has been shown by the president of Ukraine when it comes to NATO. They've already not got the kind of, they haven't really got the kind of support that they had expected.
Both the profound costs to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and the costs to Russian people themselves, which are mounting every single day. The ruble is cratered. MasterCard, Visa, Apple Pay have shut down. Dozens of leading companies, from Nike to Coca-Cola, FedEx to Spotify, Netflix to Toyota, have exited the country. President Putin is making Russia a pariah, destroying in the space of a week 30 years of international openness and opportunity.
Putin has been compelled to assuage concerns of the people of Russia.
Кстати говоря, эти санкции, которые вводятся, они сродни объявлению войны. Но, слава богу, пока до этого не дошло, я думаю, что понимание того, чем это чревато и чем это грозит для всех, у наших так называемых партнеров, в кавычках, все-таки присутствует, несмотря на их безрассудные заявления, вот как это было сделано.
Attacks continue in different cities of Ukraine, and Russia is just not ready to stop the war machine. The question is that how far will Putin go?
И не будут участвовать солдаты, проходящие срочную службу. И не будет проводиться и дополнительный призыв резервистов из запаса. Поставленные задачи решают только профессиональные военные. Уверен, они надежно обеспечат безопасность и мир для народа России.
Viewers, you just heard Biden, and he came out and he said basically that the people of America should be ready for sacrifice, because obviously oil prices are going to really go up, and UK is going to stop all oil and gas imports from Russia. The United States has just made that announcement. The CIA director Burns says, I think Putin is angry. I think he's frustrated. And you know, there was a picture today of Macron. I don't know if I can pull out that picture. It was released actually by his own office. And it showed a picture of Macron. I was wondering why that picture was released. It shows a very frustrated French president looking down, looking angry, looking hopeless. All kinds of expressions after a long chat that he had on the phone with Putin. But my question here is right now, and I'd like to start with Lada. I'd like to welcome back Dov Zakim, Charles Kupchar. Last time we had an angry conversation. Thanks for coming back, Charles. Borzin Wagmar, Colonel from London. Professor Colonel Gabi Siboni from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security from Israel. Jaron Bakshi, well-known strategic analyst from India. Nikolai Tiporin from Moscow, political analyst. Victor Gao, very well-known geopolitical expert from Beijing. And Farshid Bagharian is Eurasia Director of the West Asia Research Center. So our idea in Republic is to have as many well-thought-out global conversations. And tonight we are connecting Washington, London, Israel, New Delhi, Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. Thank you. Lada is the founder and managing partner of Black Trident Defense and Security Consulting Group. Lada, now Putin is being pushed, really being pushed by the West. Economic sanctions, mercenaries being sent in, lots of funding, right? Casualties. What will he do in turn? Is anyone factoring in what he's going to do in turn?
Well,
what will he do?
I don't think that Moscow and the Kremlin and little Putin are being pushed enough. People are being slaughtered, dying from starvation, children from dehydration. Putin is targeting civilian. They forget about military infrastructure and critical infrastructure. They're starting to use forbidden weaponry, and we're looking at ballistic missiles currently coming our way from Belarus. So is Putin being pushed, or Russia being pushed enough? Maybe financially, but not enough to actually stop the killing and the apparent genocide of Ukrainians. So being pushed, yes, not enough. We need to have a no-fly zone.
No, I'd say that. Okay, I take that. So you say we need to have a no-fly zone. NATO doesn't want to directly engage. Is anybody thinking right now, Dov? Is anybody, Dov? Anybody? Yeah, you don't need NATO. Okay, so what do you need? Only Western mercenaries who are being paid $2,000, $3,000 a day?
Absolutely
20,000 of them, 30,000 of them. How's that going to end the war?
Excuse me. I think that we should look at history and look at the creation of coalitions of no-fly zones, like Iraq, Bosnia is a little bit different, Libya, where actually even United Nations Security Council resolutions weren't immediately in place.
So why is Bosnia different? There was a no-fly zone. No, why is Bosnia different? There was a no-fly zone which the US violated. Is that why it's different?
No, it's different because NATO actually enforced it from the very beginning. I'm talking about creating a coalition of countries that actually co-authored the United Nations General Assembly resolution. Many of them, including Asian countries, including Kuwait, Qatar, took part in writing them, and we can create a coalition to at least establish or create the diplomatic preliminary foundation for a no-fly zone. The rules of engagement can be developed, and importantly, this is 2022. We have technology that can jam radar systems that will prevent, like, it's not like you're going to have to kill Russian pilots who are violating Ukrainian airspace. There are other technologies available, and it is now time for the global community to really pull together and say, this is enough. Enough killing, financial, economic sanctions, great, but they're not stopping the killing on the ground. So what is the objective? of those financial sanctions.
So let me get in the other side. Let me get in before I get the Russian response to that. I want to go to Victor Gao. Victor, now if all of this happens, right? If Putin is going to be pushed more and more economically through third party engagement of fighters, weapons, right, to cause him damage, and as Lada says, other technological ways to cripple the Russian military. What will Putin do? I wonder, and I'm wondering whether in all of this anyone's factoring in that or everyone wants to play the risky game. Victor.
Thank you very much for having me. I would say several points. One is that mankind is so close to the brink of a nuclear disaster that we all need to pause and think twice about what's going on. We are all pained by what's happening to Ukraine. I think the utmost important thing is to save as many innocent lives as possible. Save Ukrainian rather than push the Ukrainian to death. Now, the other thing is that whether you agree with that or not, President Putin of Russia apparently has a job to do, and he is determined to do his job. No one can stop him. No-fly zone is not going to work because if we impose a no-fly zone against a country like Russia with nuclear weapons, and the largest nuclear weapons in the world, you are talking about triggering nuclear disaster. So whoever who is pushing for nuclear no-fly zone need to think twice. You do not want to save the Ukrainian and then destroy the whole world. You want to save the Ukrainian and save mankind at the same time. So let's be realistic. Let's understand yourself. Let's understand President Putin. Let's understand what Russia can do. And we do not want to have nuclear disaster in wiping out mankind from the surface of this earth. Diplomacy is the only right way going forward. We need to enable Ukraine and Russia to talk, and Russia also needs to talk to countries like the United States, all NATO members. No more escalation of war involving Ukraine. This is the key important thing for mankind right now.
I would say this. I would say this right now, that without just one point, Lada and Dove, I think it becomes extremely necessary not to let any egos play anymore and to realize the consequences, which I think the cooler minds understand, of escalating this. Now, everyone has started saying, and Lada says, implement a no-fly zone. A no-fly zone would mean, therefore, Dove, that if a Russian fighter jet were to enter Ukrainian airspace, right, NATO and America would be bound to shoot it down. That would mean that, no, one second. You can't say it won't happen. No, you can't. You're not taking responsibility for that. Let's be very clear about it. Dove can get into this. Dove, allow me. Dove, the question is economic sanctions up to a point. At what point does one also have to begin to factor in that if this becomes a direct conflict between both sides, what are going to be the consequences? I think Victor's view from Beijing seems very ominous, and we can't dismiss it, can we, Dove?
No, I don't think we can. And I think there are other ways. It'll surprise you, but I agree that a no-fly zone probably would not work, simply because, yes, once you have a Russian aircraft, an American or NATO aircraft up in the air, you just don't know whether something might happen, and then you get a much wider war that no one wants. On the other hand, the Ukrainians are asking for, and should get, in my view, much more high-level air defense systems. Right now, we're sending them lower-level air defense systems, Stingers, which only really work if you have a low-flying aircraft, and then you can shoot them down, particularly helicopters, but not only helicopters. What you really need is to make sure that you can shoot down high-level bombers as well. The equivalent of Patriot missiles, for example. Once you do that, you're going to start clearing the skies of Russian aircraft. That's what I believe we ought to be sending in addition to everything else we are.
No, but Dove,
but you have to have a balanced
why are
view
you
of
and
this.
Lada not answering? Dove, what you and Lada have begun saying is we should do more, we should send more arms, we should send more military aid, we should get more directly involved. All I'm asking is, Dove, are you absolutely not concerned that if push comes to shove, if pushed to the extreme, what could conceivably, and let me put that question to Professor Colonel Gabi Siboni. He's joining us from Israel, from the Jerusalem Institute. Okay, I lost his line. Let me put that question to Nikolai. Nikolai, what could Putin do?
Put it to me. What,
will he push the nuclear button?
You're saying that I'm not thinking about it. Of course,
I'm getting everyone in
about it. One of the reasons that you don't support, that I don't support a no-fly zone, is precisely that you don't want to push Putin to the brink where he might actually think about using nuclear weapons. That's not going to help anybody, least of all the Ukrainians. Of course, we're thinking about that, and we've been exceedingly careful. We are involved. There's no question. We're supporting the Ukrainians with arms, but it's a very big difference between supporting with arms and getting directly involved, confronting the Russians, shooting them down by ourselves. We are very, very conscious of the fact that Mr. Putin doesn't seem to have limits right now. We're trying to convince him that there are limits, but we certainly don't want to encourage him to do anything crazy like starting a nuclear war.
No, so who can take the guarantee for that? Nikolai, how far will Putin go? Can I just get Nikolai's one view from Moscow, and I'll come back to you, Lada, because 2 or 3 of our panelists haven't spoken yet. Let's get the first word from everyone. Yes, please. Nikolai.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to clarify my position that I'm absolutely against war. I'm absolutely against bombing and killing people. I have a lot of friends in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, and Vinnytsia, in other cities. For the time being, I'm in constant contacts with my colleagues, and I'm very anxious about their lives. That's why I should be clear that I am against the war. And the question is how we can stop the war right now. I think we should, let's say, discuss this question, not the question of the air, of open air, closed air, etc. And I should tell you that Ukrainian and Russian delegations already had 3 meetings in Belovezhskaya Push, in Belarusian territory nearby Ukrainian border. And they, of course, maybe not advanced very much further in discussing stopping war, but at the same time they, in my view, discussed so-called humanitarian corridors for ordinary people to leave from the cities. And also,
but how far will Putin go? Nikolai, the feeling has been that Putin is not dealing with things very rationally. You can say as much that you're against the killings, but you're not stopping it. The humanitarian corridors have been ineffective for the first day, and the world is on the edge because they don't know the extent to which Putin will go. These are serious questions now. You cannot dismiss them. Will he push the nuclear button? Will he snap and cause a world war? What if he goes all out? What is Putin's definition of going all out? And I do not think any country or individual has the right to put the entire world on edge. You know, this is going way beyond the territorial ambitions of Russia, and you need to recognize that. General Bakshi, I'm coming to you, but okay, let's get General Bakshi. Let's get General, but before General Bakshi, I want to get in Charles Kupchan also, please, in from Washington. Nobody's answering this question, Charles. How far will Putin go? Why are people not talking about it?
Well, you know, we are talking about it here, and nobody knows. I have to say that I'm skeptical that he can be stopped. And that's because he has articulated a set of objectives that are very ambitious. Installing a new government in Kyiv, rolling back the post-Cold War order. He is paying a price as we speak that's much greater than he ever expected. The Ukrainians are fighting back with amazing defiance, resistance. And these sanctions are really hurting the Russian economy. The ruble is plummeting. Companies are leaving in droves. Even oil and gas companies are getting out. So Russia is really looking at an economic collapse. And in some ways, what's happened here is Russia's effort to weaponize oil and gas, to weaponize economic trade, has been turned against it to great effect. I think the pressure needs to stay on. I agree with Dov that we need to be careful not to push his back up against the wall and encourage him to escalate. But at this point, I think he is unprepared to back down. I'm very skeptical that the diplomacy that Nikolai talked about is going to work. So, I think he's going to keep pushing until he gets control of at least eastern Ukraine. I'm guessing he's not going to go for the rest of the country, but we need to do everything that we can to foil his attempt. And so far, I think the pushback has been remarkable. Western unity has been very impressive and is staying strong.
Yes, so, what is his end game? Will he stop? You've got to be realistic, Nikolai. Some people say Putin will stop only when the USSR is recreated. But you've got to be realistic. Putin says the end of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. But you know what? You've got to be realistic. You've got to be realistic. Your economy is 1/10 the size of China. You are not the economic power that you're projecting to the people. You got what you wanted. Your foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said this is about demilitarizing Ukraine. Actually, let me go to Farshid Bagharian. Farshid, if they have already destroyed more than 2,100 military installations of Ukraine, if the idea was demilitarization of Ukraine, then they should pack up now. They've achieved what they wanted.
Okay, thanks to all. But I have another aspect. Let me explain that. The world is not facing this war between the Ukraine and Russia. The world is involved in this war, and the world is not. How can I explain? This is not the ban against the Russia. This is the ban against the world. Because if you face rising of the price of the oil, all the world will be involved in this war, and the hazardous hunger, the hazardous shortness of food. We will face, before nuclear attack, we will face the shortness of food. This is the fact. But I believe that Mr. Putin is not go longer. Why? Because the Russia itself, as the structure, will stop Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin is a player, is an agent, and the structure is Russia. But right now, we have to push the Russia to stop Mr. Putin. And the world has no power to stop Mr. Putin itself. But we believe that on Thursday, there is the negotiation between the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and Russia with Turkey in Antalya. And we are hoping that something will happen over there because Mr. Lavrov maybe have the same concern with us. But I'm telling you that this war is not stopping by the U.S. because the ban that Mr. Biden announced in the last state is not only for Russia. We are in a struggle with our shortness of food, the first, and the drama between the border of Ukraine and Russia is not only. This is the first drama, humanitarian drama, and the second will be in the Iran, in Pakistan, in India because of the hunger. I'm telling you. Okay.
No, but this economic blackmail on both sides, General Bakshi, you got the economic blackmail on both sides. But nobody's talking about Putin. Burzin, before I come to you, General Bakshi, we are getting concerned across the world, and I think this is brinkmanship of an extreme kind. Nobody understands. This is not about who's right or wrong anymore. It's about taking it to the brink or pulling it back. I have not heard a single voice which gives a concrete solution on pulling it back. You tell me, General Bakshi, how far will Putin go? How far will Putin go? What is his end game? He's pushed to the brink. What will he do now?
Excellent question, Arnab, and one that has to be asked. The simple fact is, we in India have been working against, limited war against a nuclear backdrop since 1999, when immediately after the Pokhran nuclear tests, we had the Kargil war. and Pakistan tried to push the envelope, to push us to see how far it could push without crossing the red lines. One of the first things that you are taught in these, conventional war games, trying to reach the nuclear edge is, don't push the other side to the edge. You drive him up against a wall, and the chances that he will panic and press the button are pretty high. That is what, in every war game that we fought, we've come to this conclusion. Now, let me highlight to you certain very dangerous developments. The economy has been weaponized. Banks have been weaponized. SWIFT exchange mechanisms have been weaponized. Specific oil and defense companies have been blacklisted. Individuals have been blacklisted. Now, look, in 1991, what had happened, Arnab? The Russians for 1 decade, the Americans for 1 decade had brought down the price of oil with the oil glut of 1986. The price of oil was brought down to almost $10 a barrel. It was done with the express purpose of destroying the Soviet economy, and it did. The Soviet Union was flushed down the tube of history without a shot being fired. You think the Russians will let that happen again tamely? They will go down. I think we've just pushed.
So what will they do? No, sir.
Very low.
General Bakshi, when you say tamely,
No,
sorry
no,
to
so
intervene.
I'll tell you what they will do.
What will they do?
Exactly.
Will they respond? No, Lavrov said recently, allow me 1 minute, sorry, just allow me. Lavrov said recently, I think he said it in response to a comment that came from someone in France to the French. He said, watch your tongue, he said, watch your tongue, Burzin. Economic wars can often lead to real ones. And you see the language of Victor Gao. Victor Gao, 2 weeks back, was diplomatic. Did he sound diplomatic today? And I believe he speaks for the mood in China.
Answer that?
People are openly talking about nuclear war, Burzin. No. So, nobody's talking of the escalation
answer
now.
that?
Sure, please do, and then I'll get Burzin in. Yeah.
Arnab, this is very important. Take your mind back to Second World War. Crippling economic sanctions were imposed against Japan. And you know what Japan did? They said, before we lose everything, let's use it. And they did Pearl Harbor. This time, it could be a nuclear Pearl Harbor. Believe you me. And this is for once that India and China.
So that's are we talking so loosely about it?
Is
this nuclear blackmail now?
Harbor,
okay, so Burzin, one second. We saw Boris Johnson.
Let me tell you how it will happen. If I may, Arnab. Arnab, one of the hello, kya ho gaya? Hello.
Yeah, go on briefly. Yeah.
Hello. Sorry.
Go
Arnab,
on, sir. Go on.
We were wargaming this scenario as to how nuclear red lines could be crossed. Let's say you start creating greater and greater difficulties for Putin in Ukraine. You see, and as a shot across the bow, he fires a tactical nuke on Kyiv. Tell me, what have you achieved? You drive him up against the wall.
I'll ask Burzin that. Okay, so you ask okay, so you created. No. 1 second. Now, General Bakshi, just hold on for a minute. Just hold on for a minute. You created this wargaming scenario. Lada wants to respond, but I'll get Burzin in, Lada, because he hasn't spoken. I'll open it up after that. Yes, Burzin. Then what?
Speaking of the nuke option, Arnab, if I could slightly distract everyone. Today, Seoul and Tokyo are demanding from Washington nuclear guarantees for Taipei. It has come to that, given what the scenario is and how the Taiwanese are looking at things playing out. And it's not the Taiwanese who are asking for nuclear guarantees, but South Korea and Japan. So that tells you the gravity of the situation and what the ramifications are of it. But to come back to your Tehran guest, as he rightly put it, I wish there was a miracle to take Putin out. But there is nothing to suggest, since he's a one-man show and the army and the intelligence services are in his hock. Sergei Lavrov is his poodle, so we can dismiss that. And the only reason why Zelensky has survived so far, all three assassination attempts, is because thanks to disgruntled Russian intelligence officers in the FSB, Federalnaya Sluzhba, the Russian intelligence service, who have leaked details of these assassination attempts against him, which tells you what the Russian groundswell of opinion is, that they are dead set against this war, including 13,000 Russians who have been arrested merely for protesting peacefully on the streets of Russia. And women have been tortured in police stations.
Okay, so I'm getting a live feed from Zelensky. Zelensky addressing the British Parliament. We'll keep the guests on screen. I'll just run that in the middle. Let's listen to what he says. 30 seconds. Zelensky live addressing the UK House of Commons. Let's cut live for 30 seconds. We come back. Let's cut live, Anand. Yeah, go. Let's go.
Everybody woke up. People, children, the entire Ukraine, and since that we have not been sleeping. We have all been fighting for our country with our army. On day 2, we have been fighting airstrikes, and our heroic military servicemen on the island Zmyny have been trying to fight when Russian when Russian forces demanded that we lay down the arms. However, we did continue fighting, and we did feel our force, the force of our people that will oppose the occupants until the end. The next day, the artillery started fighting us. Our army showed us who we are, and we have been able to see who are people and who are beasts. On day 4, we started getting people captive. We have not been torturing them.
I'll cut back to that. Lada, while General Bakshi presented that nuclear scenario, I saw you, getting quite agitated. You don't think that's a reality? Burzin's call seems to be that Putin will lose support. Yes.
Actually, let's talk to our pro-Russian partners.
You think
on
General Bakshi is overblowing it?
And let's focus on the Russian Federation. Where are the people that are going to control Putin and his cronies that are leading your Russian Federation and the rest of the world into disaster? We are not asking for a no-fly zone over the Russian Federation yet. Perhaps we should be. And as it goes to our British colleague, who is now talking about other countries asking for nuclear guarantees, please be careful that those nuclear guarantees are worth more than the toilet paper that the Budapest Memorandum is worth, as is shown by the United States, the United Kingdom, and let's not forget China. Because if we're having this discussion about nuclear war, China is also a signatory alongside France. In times of a nuclear threat, China promised to step up to support and defend Ukrainian territorial sovereignty. So China, I hope that at least we will have a little bit more support from the financial aspects, if it is easier for you. And the nuclear aspect, Putin is one man. The men surrounding him are a bunch of men. We have a world that can have a brain and function with integrity. So yes, we can stop a madman. We have the technology, we have the effort, and it's time to stop talking, and it's time to start putting international law and the spirit of the preambles into effect. Otherwise, this war, as our learned friend from Iran,
you don't quite seem to. Lada, you don't. Okay, so can I? See, you don't seem to quite much care about what could go wrong. I mean, that's not even a consideration in your mind, not even a far off consideration.
The Russians have taken over Chernobyl.
Which doesn't quite allow me. I think the people should be concerned.
Where are you? What are you?
No, I think people should be. See, I'll tell you one thing, Lada. Lada, listen. Lada, listen. Listen, let's be real.
Yes.
Zelensky has already said today, please remember, Zelensky has himself said today I don't have any hopes on NATO, right? And Russia had placed Crimea's recognition as part of its demands. And Zelensky is completely open to it from what he said here today. So he's offering dialogue. But I'm increasingly seeing, and that's my point, Charles, I'm increasingly seeing, Charles, and I know you might get angry again, but I'll risk it, increasingly seeing people in America saying, no, let's do more, let's go for it. You know, we've got the upper hand. Let's continue. Let's send in more mercenaries. Let's pump in more military equipment. Let's go get them. You know, this approach, I feel, Charles, is fraught with risks, and it's not very diplomatic. Charles.
I would say, Arnab, that the U.S. and its allies have found what I think is just about the right line of giving military support, political support, economic support to Ukraine, but not crossing a line. Biden said, we're not going to war with Ukraine. We are not giving to the Ukrainians types of weaponry that we think would lead to an escalation to World War III. So it's a fine line, but I think it's the right line. And Biden has said we will defend every inch of NATO territory. But let me just make two additional points that I think are important here. One, I agree with Laura that one big potential pushback against Putin is the people of Russia. This is not a popular war in Russia. Friends of mine, high-ranking Russians, are speaking out against Putin. This really is a game changer in terms of Russian politics. Could they get rid of Putin? No, maybe, I don't know, but this is new, and I think we should keep an eye on it. The other issue is China, and maybe our Chinese colleague could weigh in here. China is really Russia's lifeline for money, to buy oil, to help deal with the economic collapse. If anybody has a lot of influence on Putin, it's Xi Jinping. We need China to step up to the plate.
Okay, should I get a response from Victor, please? Victor?
I will be happy to say that.
Burzin, can you come in after Victor, please? Because I want Victor to respond to his point. I'll come to you after that. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. China stands for peace, and China urges all the parties directly involved and indirectly involved to resort to negotiation and diplomacy. We should not pour more fuel onto the fire in Ukraine. Secondly, China respects the authority of the United Nations Security Council. China will abide by any sanctions endorsed and approved by the United Nations Security Council. Now, if there are other countries which want to impose sanctions on Russia, be my guest. But if you want to force China to join you in your sanctions against Russia, then you are overreaching. You are overstepping. Why? Because you are an independent foreign country. China is an independent country. China can decide for itself and by itself what international position it wants to adopt. China-Russia relations are very close. We share a common border, 4,700 kilometers. No one can seal off that common border between China and Russia. This is the reality everyone needs to acknowledge rather than try to overturn. This cannot be overturned. China will be here as a force standing for peace. We want to save as many Ukrainian civilians as possible. We offered assistance to the humanitarian disasters in Ukraine. We opened the door to Ukrainian families, for example, and refugees, and we will continue to do that. But that's not enough. I think right now, we need to really do earnest diplomacy to de-escalate rather than escalate, to bring mankind from the brink of nuclear disaster, rather than continue to push all of us, mankind.
You mentioned nuclear disaster the third time.
Right. And what about the Budapest
Why do you keep mentioning nuclear disaster? He says, what about the Budapest Agreement?
China is reticent to do anything, Arnab. Let's face it.
Yeah, they won't. They won't, but let's also face it. What if the economic What if China
No,
offers,
Arnab,
and China has the ability to absorb, if for a short to medium term, Russia's economic losses? What if it does that and says that
yeah,
for the global realignment that we want, we're going to absorb the losses? What will you do?
China can eye Russian sources as a resource for itself in its current circumstances, but China does not have the capacity to absorb Russian gas. There is simply no piping capacity currently for it to do so, even if Putin throws all the gas that he wishes to. So Riyadh and Tehran still remain Beijing's first and second suppliers. Moscow is third, and it will not supersede them in the medium or long-term future. And just remember, Arnab, that Sino-Russian trade stands at $87 billion. China's global trade stands at $950 billion, and China is a recipient of westward indirect inward investment. It cannot afford to jeopardize its relations with us once sanctions are imposed.
Boris Johnson is speaking now. UK House of Commons after Zelensky. Let's hear him. Let's go live, 30 seconds.
So this is a moment for us to put our political differences aside, Mr. Speaker. And I know I speak for the whole House when I say that Britain and our allies are determined to press on with supplying our Ukrainian friends with the weapons they need to defend their homeland as they deserve. To press on with tightening the economic vice around Vladimir Putin, and we will stop importing Russian oil, Mr. Speaker. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will update the House on that tomorrow. And we will employ every method that we can, diplomatic, humanitarian and economic, Mr. Speaker, until Vladimir Putin has failed in this disastrous venture and Ukraine is free once more.
That's Boris Johnson speaking. In the British Parliament, I'm going back right now, and Nikolai, the quicker bet that everyone seems to be taking here is put the pressure on the Russian economy, put the pressure on the Russian people, and then the Russian people will unseat Putin. There'll be too much pressure on him. If that happens, if it's a question of his political existence, if if it is, and it could well be, what will Putin do?
If you allow me to speak, I can tell you that there are two things. There are sanctions against ordinary people, ordinary Russians, and there are sanctions against Russian army, armed forces. And I can tell you that sanctions for the time being, they hit ordinary Russian people. They don't hit Russian forces. Armed forces, because armed forces are absolutely isolated from ordinary people and from our, let's say, joint economy. It has almost everything made in Russia, almost everything, missiles, tanks, weapons, automatic guns, etc., everything is done in Russia. It uses
no, but what about your economy? What about jobs? What about the people? What about protests? Dove, no.
It uses Russian soldiers. If you put sanctions against Russia, it means you put sanctions against ordinary people. That is most important thing. Not on Putin. You put sanctions against other Muscovites, other Russians. Not against Russian army. I'm sorry, not against Russian army, because it is fully independent.
No, but is the Russian, one minute. The Russian army is made up of Russians, and the Russian army cannot completely be isolated from what the Russian people go through. Dove, here our guest from Moscow is making a big difference between the Russian army and the Russian people. He seems to be saying the sanctions will have no effect on the military plans. Dove.
Absolutely, you're right. Absolutely.
Let me speak now. Of course they will. The Russian army is full of conscripts. It's not a professional army. It's a bunch of young men who have been drafted and who are close to their families, and half of whom, if not more than half, don't even know why they're in Ukraine. Those sanctions are going to affect their families, and we know that a lot of Russians soldiers are already trying to avoid actual battle. I also want to say something to my Chinese friend. The whole argument that you're waiting for a Security Council resolution on sanctions when you know fully well that Russia will veto any such resolution means that China is playing a double game. And if China really wants peace and really wants negotiations, then what China should do is she must tell Putin that he must stop. He must stop bombing families. He must stop bombing buildings. He must stop bombing institutions and really talk. And then China could indeed say, look, we're not going to help you economically if you're not going to stop bombing. But if you wait for a Security Council resolution, you're speaking with double speak because you know Russia will veto every single one of those. Look at the General Assembly vote. 141 countries condemned Russia. Where was China?
Let me make several points. When you talk about the United Nations...
Victor, we have Victor and Farshid on the right. Yes, please. Victor wants to come in. He has the right to respond. Yes.
Or voted against the resolution. That's a very important thing. Major countries like India, like Brazil, like China, etc., with huge populations, took positions which are different from mostly Western positions. Secondly, what China stands for is exactly for saving more lives in Ukraine. If there are countries which keep providing weapons, pour more fuel onto the fire, you will lead to more lives being lost for the Ukraine. I hope when the dust settles, and it has to settle, there will be Ukrainians surviving this disaster, rather than you urge the Ukrainians to die, and then you stand on the other side of the shore without suffering any damage to your skin. This is the time to save Ukrainians in decency, in honor, rather than urging the Ukrainians to be destroyed by war. We need to stop the war rather than urging the Ukrainians to die. In the American military, you never allow prisoners to die like the former imperialist, the Japanese soldiers. You always urge your prisoners to surrender rather than die, because there will always be a better day. This is the point for Ukraine. Ukraine need to wake up. Those who have your weapons may not be serving your lives. This is the key.
Arnab, can I?
Jalbakshi,
Arnab, may I?
A minute left on the debate tonight.
Arnab, I'd like to point out one thing.
Yes.
Arnab, I'd like to point out one thing in all earnestness as a military veteran and as a human being. We are getting very perilously close to disaster. It is in the interests of all.
Yes,
global economies are coming out of the shock of COVID. They're coming out of the shock of COVID. You know, when we were fighting in Bangladesh, we got a lot of help from our Soviet friends. But one thing they kept on telling us was, hurry it up, hurry it up, hurry it up. Today, the same advice we will give to our Russian friends. Please get it over with. The world cannot afford this any longer. The Ukrainian people will suffer the most.
2 weeks is too long.
Russia to the last Ukrainian.
Yeah. 2 weeks is 2 weeks is too long.
And it should be the earliest possible. We must
2 weeks
go
is
in
too
for
long.
a ceasefire.
I agree with you on that. I'll just say this. No, I'll say this. I'll say this, General Bakshi, if the intent of the Russians was the recognition of Crimea, DPR, LPR by Ukraine, and Zelensky has expressed his intent to find a solution, then I think Russia has achieved its military objective. 2 weeks is too long. Anything further is going to be absolute disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, big breaking news from Ukraine, biggest reporting team on the ground, and of course, the fastest news updates on the war, both on live streaming and on our channel. I shall see you tomorrow. Till then, good night and goodbye.